Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and all the international representatives here today and all those who helped make this event possible. I want to welcome all the representatives of the 56 countries that recognize interim Venezuelan President Juan Guaido and all the other nations here that support a democratic process. I'm happy to be here in Lima, where the Lima Group was created, in a country that has demonstrated its resolve to help its neighbor Venezuela in its darkest hours. The United States thanks Peru for all the efforts you have made to address Venezuela's humanitarian crisis. We also thank the other countries, especially Colombia and Brazil, who have been leaders in responding to the refugee crisis. You've set an example of how to help your Venezuelan brothers and sisters. In 1910, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt gave a speech in Paris called Citizenship in a Republic, where he spoke about the qualities needed to be good citizens and good leaders. Good citizens dare to act on behalf of their families, their communities, and their countries. Roosevelt said that it was cowardly to just stand on the sidelines and criticize. He said, "It is not the critic who counts. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood." 56 countries recognize interim Venezuelan President Juan Guaido as today's man in the arena, uniting the opposition and fighting for freedom against an illegitimate authoritarian regime. Maduro uses death squads trained and equipped by Cuba to kidnap, imprison, torture, and kill nearly 10,000 Venezuelan citizens. His regime has reduced the living wage to less than 5% of the price of a basic food basket, leaving families to dig through garbage cans in search of anything to feed themselves and their children. His regime has turned away medicine deliveries, a death sentence to more than 1,600 innocent men, women, and children. And his regime has installed Chinese surveillance equipment to track what ordinary citizens are doing and manipulate the media to spread lies and propaganda. While the people starving in the streets, the Maduro regime politicized a subsidized food program as part of its effort to impose social controls. Last week, the United States announced sanctions and criminal charges against the perpetrators of this massive corruption scheme. Maduro's cronies skimmed millions of dollars from a program intended to feed millions of starving Venezuelans. We've seen this before. These are not the acts of a legitimate president or a servant of the people. These atrocities are the acts of a brutal dictator. You have to ask yourself, who would support such a tyrant? Look no further than Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran. Cuba's security intelligence forces are the linchpin of external support to this dictator. The United States is taking assertive actions to break the ties between Venezuela and Cuba. Our sanctions against vessels transporting oil between the two countries are just the beginning. To both Russia and China, we say that your support to the Maduro regime is intolerable, particularly to the democratic regime that will replace Maduro. We say again to Russia, and especially to those who control its finances, do not double down on a bad bet. To China, which is already desperate to recoup its financial losses, the quickest route to getting repaid is to support a new, legitimate government. China argues against foreign intervention in Venezuela, which is a good argument for all Cuban and Russian military and paramilitary forces to leave Venezuela immediately. In this hemisphere, it is our moral imperative to defend our neighbors against any threat, internal or external, that undermines peace, security, and prosperity. Maduro has been hoping the world would just let him tap the opposition along, while he continued to oppress and steal and kill for his private gain. But Maduro is at the end of his rope. Venezuela is now among the poorest countries on the planet. People are fleeing by the millions. Maduro can't trust his own generals. Soldiers have decided that the regime is against the people, and they are deserting in record numbers. The readiness of Venezuela's military is now open to serious question, which simply strengthens the hand of the Cubans and other outsiders. Maduro is hoping to wait out the international community and the people of Venezuela. We show here today that the international community remains steadfast in its commitment to increase the pressure and accelerate a peaceful transition to Venezuela's only legitimate government institution, the National Assembly. The United States will not stand by while Venezuelans are kidnapped, tortured, killed, and millions are forced to flee. We see Maduro using his same old tactics, pretending to be interested in a dialogue when we all know that he's just buying time, tapping us along. We will not fall for these old tricks of a tired dictator. No more tapping. Now is the time for action. The United States has made clear since January that our policy is to support interim President Guaido, the democratically elected National Assembly, and the Venezuelan people. Recognizing the National Assembly has been our single most important step in advancing a peaceful constitutional transition. We have ensured that there is a constitutional path to end the dictatorship and ensure that free and fair elections can take place. Since 2017, the United States has made over 200 Venezuela-related designations pursuant to various executive orders and American statutes. Our policy has put pressure on Maduro and his insiders and enablers who profit from the misery of Venezuela's people. Our actions have been deliberate, precise, and thoughtful to ensure that we protect the Venezuelan people and they have access to what they need to survive. In the last 6 months, we have issued sanctions against over 100 individuals and key entities that have served as a lifeline to Maduro, including PDVSA, the Central Bank of Venezuela, and the Venezuela Development Bank. We will ensure that Maduro runs out of ways to financially sustain himself. But today, we're here to do more. Not only are we not going to relieve sanctions on the Maduro regime, yesterday President Trump signed an executive order to impose full blocking sanctions on assets of the government of Venezuela within our jurisdiction. This executive order freezes all of the Venezuelan government's assets and prohibits transactions with it unless specifically exempted. Critically, the executive order also authorizes sanctions on foreign persons who provide support or goods or services to any designated person, including to the government of Venezuela. Further, this action greatly restricts the entry into the United States of sanctioned individuals. I want to be clear that this sweeping executive order authorizes the U.S. government to identify, target, and impose sanctions on any persons who continue to provide support to the illegitimate regime of Nicolas Maduro. It directly targets illegitimate Maduro-run or aligned institutions and sends a direct signal to all those who enable his dictatorship and undermine the democratically elected Venezuelan National Assembly or interim President Juan Guaido. We're taking this step to deny Maduro access to the global financial system and to further isolate him internationally. In addition, we are sending a signal to third parties that want to do business with the Maduro regime. Proceed with extreme caution. There is no need to risk your business interest with the United States for the purposes of profiting from a corrupt and dying regime. This is the first time in 30 years that we are imposing an asset freeze against a government in this hemisphere. The Maduro dictatorship is on notice. Not since an asset freeze against the Noriega government in Panama in 1988, a trade embargo on Nicaragua in 1985, or the comprehensive asset freeze and trade embargo on Cuba in 1962 have we taken this action. In each of these instances, we used robust economic tools against dictatorships that were destroying their countries with corruption, violence, and repression. It worked in Panama, it worked in Nicaragua once, and it will work there again, and it will work in Venezuela and Cuba. The United States has also used similar and even more aggressive tools like these in Iran, North Korea, and Syria. Now, Venezuela is part of this very exclusive club of rogue states. This bloc is not against the people of Venezuela, but the Maduro regime. The United States has taken careful measures to safeguard the Venezuelan people's access to humanitarian goods and basic needs. Proving our determination to help the Venezuelans, we have acted to protect Interim President Guaido, the National Assembly, and their allies by using 21 new general licenses to exempt activities such as providing humanitarian goods, mail delivery, telecommunications, access to the internet, and activities undertaken by international and non-governmental organizations. And later today, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross will describe to you the plans that he and others have been making for the day after in Venezuela, when the dictatorship falls. We seek the peaceful transfer of power, but as President Trump has said from the beginning, all options are on the table. The time to act is now. The United States is acting assertively to cut off Maduro financially and accelerate a peaceful democratic transition. We look to our international partners to take action because the longer we wait, the more the Venezuelan people suffer. We've made it clear that Maduro, the Russians, and the Cubans should not do anything to put more innocent civilians in harm's way, nor should they retaliate against Juan Guaido. We must work together to safeguard this hemisphere from external meddling that threatens regional peace and security, democracy, and prosperity. It is time to bring Maduro's tyrannical reign to a peaceful end for the benefit of the entire Western Hemisphere. The United States stands with the Venezuelan people in their quest to reclaim their proud heritage, to reclaim their lives of peace, and to reclaim their freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.